time for some paper examples of some great work that you're doing. But first, this book. Now you remember, this is a book. I was doing research, wasn't looking for this book, looked interesting, so I grabbed it, I requested it, I got it, then it sat on a shelf somewhere for 2 weeks before I finally opened it up, and I went to the table of contents, which I already knew from research that I liked, and I'm like, oh, okay. One of the things that jumped out on me is they have a section on the bystander effect, and I have read that in multiple papers. So I'm like, that triggered me to think back to the book. And so one thing before we get to the paper examples, and I think this is students, I have yet to meet a classroom where talking about procrastination isn't valuable for at least 25% of the students. I made that number up. It's most likely higher. But this book, they're all 3-4 page chapters, but it says this, there's a misconception and then there's a truth. So on procrastination, it says this: you procrastinate because you are lazy and can't manage your time well. That's the idea, right? Why didn't you do it? Just get your blank together, right? Here's the truth. Procrastination is fueled by weakness in the face of impulse. So this is about impulse control and a failure to think about thinking. If you look farther into this, he goes into detail, but you can think about metacognition, thinking about thinking, right? Means just that, right? So oftentimes somebody who procrastinates, you ask them what they do, and they'll be like, I just do stuff, right? Or maybe watch videos. But if you think farther along it, you can probably find out what's going on. What are the triggers, in a sense, right, that will move you towards procrastination, right? So there's one part really interesting. There's, of course, so much to procrastination that you're not going to cover in 3 pages, but I think this is really important. It's not because you're lazy and you can't manage your time well. There is other stuff going on. It's easy to say that, right? And then we don't have to actually deal with somebody's life and how they're going about it and what their thinking process is, etc. Then the other thing, because I often will talk to a student and they'll be like, okay, good, got it. I'm going to do this from now on because it worked really well for a week. This is about if you stop engaging in a bad habit, the habit will gradually diminish until it disappears from your life. Right? Yay! If I do something right 28 times, it'll go. Here's the truth. Anytime you quit something cold turkey, your brain will make a last-ditch effort to return you to your habit. Damn you, brain! But think about it. If you've avoided studying by A, B, and C for the last 5 years, and then all of a sudden you say, okay, I'm done with Netflix, as if your brain is going to believe you mean it. Right? And it's going to go, wait, what's going on here? I am uncomfortable. This is not a regular routine. And it will push back. So lots of little neat things. And I'm going to bring up another one when we get to John's paper. Now, though, great section on anger. I've, of course, made stuff larger so you can see it. Now, I'm going to walk you through about what I like about this so you can see, hey, is there a spot in my paper where I can do that? So first, prisoners could see throughout the stories use anger to cope with them and the circumstances around them. Nice, clear topic sentence. And again, in the beginning or the end, you want that sentence that covers what the main idea is. So I'm going to expect this is going to be about using anger to cope. Then we get an example from the story, right? Okay, right? Making sense, but she doesn't stop there, right? And so goes into detail about how this works. So since everything else in their lives was out of control, they'd turn those aggression on those who were weaker from them, right? That makes sense. And prisoners had a strong hatred for their captors, but since they can't put it out on them, turn it on those loose. You know, think about how many times you've been mad at somebody else and it came out and you're mean to your dog, you're short with your kid, you blow up at your friend because your boss actually made you do another shift. So you can see, even on the smaller level, that there's some, you know, this happens, right? So we've got this really great part where, here's what I'm going to talk about, a good, appropriate example from the book. I mean, it is, look at this. I'm furious, right? I'm furious. This is an example that shows anger. You always want to make sure that your examples right, are doing what you're asking them to do or hope that they do. So anger is a coping mechanism. Here's them being angry. Now explaining how the coping mechanism works. And then further on, and I think this is a spot where this could actually be expanded, turned into its own paragraph. Look at this. Psychologists who research topic of anger. Anger allows you to feel numb. Holy cow, right? It's the brain's way of preventing you from feeling emotions that you don't want to. So, dang, right? This is some good research. This is putting good ideas together. And if you think about, anger, oftentimes we think of that outward red face, the screaming. But anger in here by psychologists is being tied to being numb. And as you read the stories, that could be something too. So the anger and where it's directed, I think, could be its own piece. And then the psychology and the numbness could be its another own section. But as you can see, right, this is really interesting, well-researched, and connected to the story. And remember, you might only have a small piece connected to the story because it is just sort of like that got me thinking about authority, and I'm branching out. So it does not all have to be this detailed, but this is a really nice example. So when I give feedback on one person's paper, the idea is there are probably, right, 30%, 40% of you who have an idea that could be expanded, right? Or that you have an idea that, you know what, the quote I used isn't the best quote for that, right? So as you hear me talk about somebody else's paper, of course your topic is different, but ask yourself, have I brought in the best details? Have I gone deep enough? And so when I say go deep, what I mean is really explore that one thing. So in this case, you can see started with anger, how it works, but also going anger and numbness. So not just stopping at, putting the anger on somebody else, right? So nice job. And these are some of the things that you'll want to make sure is happening in your paper. Now, the next one is on memory. All right, so here we go on memory. The misconception is that memories are played back like live recordings. If you watch a TV show, right, and if they have an eyewitness, they'll be like, oh my goodness, it's a lock shut case. But if you're actually looking to say the reality of it, eyewitnesses are actually pretty crappy because memory is not this played back. The truth, memories are constructed anew each time for whatever information is currently available from whatever information is currently available, which makes them highly permeable to influences from the present. So I will give you an example. So say I have a brother. My dad died 1.5 years ago. Say my brother is, I know, I got way more in the inheritance, right? So my brother, he's angry, right? And I'm not. Hey, look at that. I'm just floating in cash. Because my dad was a Rockefeller. Now, every time I see my brother, right, I'm thinking of how my dad, right, was great and generous. So when I remember him those times, and I reinforce my dad was great and generous. My brother, this is not a true story, right, is remembering all the times he was slighted or felt cheated, right? And so because of the inheritance, right, each one of us is changing what actually happened in the past, right? Because how we're feeling and what we want to be justified. Because one of the things is, say my dad was a jerk and gave me everything and gave Greg nothing, right? And Greg was always there for him. Well, I don't want to think my dad is a jerk. I also don't want to think that I don't deserve all of this. So I'm going to be looking back and trying to find situations in the past where Greg didn't deserve what he got, or, I'll be doing all of this stuff in the present that's going to affect my memories so they aren't as accurate as I thought. And that is the dangerous part, right? And the tricky part about going back into the past, because where we are in the present, who we're listening to, right, we'll look back and say, oh no, that is different than what it was. And there's been some amazing case studies, on this, that if you're interested, I say go and look up, right? But memory is not a videotape, right? It's not a movie. It's not 100% accurate. And check out what John does with this. All right, and this, more great research. So when you look at this story, I'm sorry, I am starting to get a cold, but hopefully I will beat it. Okay, he's talking about the difference between Tadeusz Borowski, the author, and the narrator in the story. So we have the narrator and we have the author. And they're not the same person, right? But when we look at these stories from the narrator's perspective, right, you can see that he definitely is sure not painting himself out as a hero, right, and saying, here's what I've done. But this is what's really interesting, right? Because you might read this and get the idea that the narrator, right, is in some ways, cold, practical, get through it, right? But, and check this out, humans are multifaceted, right? Especially when faced with adversity on a grand scale, right? Now, John went and found The Captive Mind by Czesław Miłosz, who's a poet, won a Nobel Prize, a Nobel laureate, yeah, so Nobel Prize in the 80s, Polish, and says, the truth about Borowski's behavior in Auschwitz, according to his fellow prisoners, is utterly different from what his stories would lead one to suppose. He acted heroically and was a model of comradeship, right? Get rid of that little part, but who cares? That's little. That's big. And, and you can see about later on, we don't know why he committed suicide, right? But I'd be wondering, I'm curious to see, did he remember himself as his fellow prisoners did, acting heroically and being a model of friendship? Or did he remember those moments when he was doing those things that we read about, right, that that maybe defined him, or maybe was just one part of this multifaceted human being who could also, set somebody up, right, to potentially be killed, and all the way to, I wonder what the prisoners would say, how he acted heroically, right? So this is a really nice piece of research, right, going farther. And there's a couple neat things about this. One, if you're on the sort of like the postmodern bent, looking at how the author is, who the author is and who their character is, and where the difference in there, which is interesting. But I think it's also really interesting to think about what we just read, what's going on. One person can say this is what it is, and and somebody else standing right next to him is, you're not a monster, you're a hero. Heroes act heroically, right? So a really neat piece of research to go and find this. And then the other thing is, you will hear me, you've heard me say it's almost always more complex than we think. And so looking at how the line between good and evil, I think Solzhenitsyn said this, doesn't go through that group of people and that growth. It goes through each human being's heart, right? And we are all capable of this. So whenever you can find out that things are more complicated than you originally thought, you're probably on the right track. All right. As far as looking at your paper, right, I would look at, is your viewpoint very black and white, right? And sometimes, sometimes that just works. I don't have a lot of patience for pedophiles. To me, black and white issue, right? So certain places, black and white make sense, but for most of reality, no. And so have you been too black and white? And you can look, and have you looked to find out, right, what are some other things that might be going on, just as in Toriana's one about sometimes anger and numbness is actually tied together. And so is sleep, which I think is kind of interesting. Sometimes people who are really angry often are really sleepy. Just a weird neurological thing. Now, going to the bystander effect, which is on page 73. Got to write this stuff down when you find it. Right now, two things on this book, which I really like. Guess what account they mention, right? Kitty Genovese. I already have a link about what's off on that or weird. And what's funny, at least if you look at the abstract of the article I have a link to, the killer was actually caught because of some work of some bystanders. Doesn't mean the bystander effect isn't valid, right, or accurate, but it does mean her story is not what you think. And so check out what he says. When someone is hurt, people rush to their aid. So that's the misconception. And I think if you look at the Kitty Genovese thing, you might also have the other misconception that when somebody's hurt, nobody will run to their aid. This is, wow, too simplistic. The truth. The more people who witness a person in distress, the less likely it is that any one person will help. So, if you fall down in a busy street, right? People are walking by and they'll think to themselves, oh, somebody else will pick you up, right? Lots of people, it can go by. Now, if you fall down on a country road and somebody goes by, and they'll think to themselves, oh, look, nobody else is here to help you, so I might stop by. So there, actually talks about how many people are around as one aspect of the bystander effect. And now I'm going to let go of the bystander effect. So Chris, there's a couple Chris's. So Chris S. is writing about hope, right? And he found a TED Talk. And so Tadek, right, that's the narrator, talks about how people blindly follow hope, even to the point of walking to their own death, right? And so here is, looking at hope can lead to, inactivity, not fighting for your life. Now, in this TED Talk, right, look at this. This is a doctor. The idea of hope is a barrier we use when we're faced with death because we don't want to accept death just yet. She argues that this makes it harder for people to accept death, and then it affects their decisions. So think about this. You're dying. You are going to die in the next week, right? Don't be like Prince. Get your will written, right? Because if you don't have a will, there's going to be, the state's going to decide. People are going to decide. Whereas if you want, if you do a will, then your things have been stated, right? So there's a lot of different things that if you really knew you were going to die in a week, I bet you could make a strong list of things you need to do, right? But if they tell you you're going to die in a week and you say, no, I've got hope, then you don't do the things that you need to do, and now you've just screwed over your family when you do die, right? So here is another way, hope, and here's multiple things that I like about it. One, we're looking at how hope isn't always as positive as you think, right? So there already, yes, it's connected. And secondly, look at this. This is hope around death. One in a concentration camp, one just in everyday life. So you can see it's not just a hope connection, it's a hope versus death connection, right? So a really nice source to bring in. Right? I hope these examples will give you some more to look at when you go through your paper, right? And also, starting Thursday, once you've done your revision, you will be sharing your paper with smaller groups, and so you'll be able to see what everybody else is doing. And one of the things, and there's a link that I have you read this, I'll talk about before that day starts. When you share your papers, right, what you are sharing is the work that you could do in the time allotted. And that is not your worth as a human being, right? Some people are going to have really drafts that are really far along. Other people's are going to have drafts that they know that they need work. And one is, one paper is stronger than the other. But as far as like you go, the paper is not your self-worth. The paper is what you could do in the time allotted. And that's important to remember, because if you've been in like the student success class, or if you've ever heard, they do this in schools all the time, and it's a good idea about growth and fixed mindset. A growth mindset is, yes, I can learn stuff, right? And it might take some work. It'll probably take some work. A fixed mindset is, I'm bored, I'm this smart in math, this smart in science, and I'll never get smarter. And if you believe that your intelligence is fixed, right, this is how smart I am. As soon as you hit that first wall, right, as soon as you get a D on a math test, you quit, because there's no reason to keep going. My mindset is fixed. My ability is fixed. Now, neurologically, scientifically, that's wrong, because your brain can learn, right? And so that's why you need a growth mindset. So you will see and it's funny, and it's at my boys' elementary school. Middle school. Nope, it was elementary, 5th grade. Anyways, you will see signs up that say have a growth mindset, right? And so it's great that they're teaching this. Now here's the thing, it's never as simple as you think. If you put your worth, if a student's worth is connected to their grade, meaning, hey, if I get a B on a paper, I'm a B human being, right? Those students typically show fixed mindset behavior, right? Because you might not turn in a paper because you don't want to get judgment right. You might make excuses for why the paper wasn't, was because that paper is you. It's not. And that kind of thinking typically stops people from actually learning and taking chances. All right, there's actually going to be a couple more videos coming this week too, and I haven't forgotten about the righteous mind and the nice discussions that you've done, but for now, here's this one. There'll be more. Have fun going over your paper, and remember, this is revision. If it's not editing, editing is, oh look, I changed the date in MLA style so it's correct. That's editing. Revising is, oh my goodness, I did not go deep enough into my ideas on hope. I'm going to cut out that one paragraph and put in new information. I might even have to do new research. So keep at it, and I'll be talking to you in another video, I'm sure, within the next day.